Maya had been awake since 4. She had not tried to go back to sleep. She had made coffee in the dark and sat with it at the kitchen table, her folder of documents in front of her, going through each page for the third time that week. Not because the pages needed reviewing, but because her hands needed something to do at 4 in the morning, when the rest of her was wound tight with a tension she could not name and could not release. The folder held her DD-214, her Combat Action Ribbon citation, her Navy Achievement Medal paperwork, medical records documenting 3 herniated discs from a blast injury she had not reported when it happened, because reporting it would have flagged the mission, and she would not flag the mission. She had kept that decision for 8 years, carrying it the way you carry things that cost you something. Not on the surface, not where anyone could see it, but deep in the structure of the body, in the tissue and bone that bore the weight of everything she had chosen not to say. She was 28 years old. Brown hair she pulled back without thinking. A gray sweater she had put on because it was warm and unremarkable. Nothing about her announced anything. That had always been the point. By 8:30 she was in her car, driving south toward the San Diego Veterans Affairs office. She had driven past the building twice before parking, and even after she pulled the key from the ignition, she sat with both palms pressed flat against her thighs, feeling the fabric of her jeans warm under the pressure. This was the third time she had tried to do this. Portland had been the first attempt. 40 minutes in the rain, all the way to the counter, and the woman behind the glass had looked at her ID and said, without cruelty but without any awareness either, "Is this your husband's file, honey?" Maya had not answered. She had walked back to her car, sat in the rain for 10 minutes and driven home. She had not spoken about it to anyone. Phoenix had been worse. She had made it to the waiting room. She had filled out the intake form, worked through it carefully, right up to the line that asked for duty station, where she had written Naval Special Warfare Command in her neat, deliberate handwriting. Something had locked up inside her chest at that point. She had folded the form in half and left it in the trash can in the women's restroom on the way out. Today was different because it had to be different. The rent was due at the end of the month. Her back had been waking her at 3 in the morning for 6 weeks. The neurologist had a 3-month wait list, and she was not going to make it 3 months without some kind of coverage. She was out of the luxury of postponement. She picked up the folder, got out of the car, walked through the front door. The waiting room was the same kind of room that existed in every VA building in every city in the country. Worn plastic chairs arranged in rows, a wall clock with a second hand that moved with the particular slowness of government building clocks, a television mounted high in the corner showing the Weather Channel on mute. The smell, that institutional combination of coffee that had been sitting since morning and carpet that had absorbed 30 years of difficult conversations. The men in the room wore their service the way some people wear their entire lives on their faces. A Desert Storm cap on a man in his late 60s, the fabric faded to old sand. A field jacket across the shoulders of a man reading a VFW magazine, the sleeves carrying patches from 3 deployments across 2 decades. Weathered hands, straight postures, the particular stillness of men who had learned to wait in places far more dangerous than a government office, and had brought that stillness home with them. Maya sat down and watched the second hand on the clock. In the front row, diagonal from the entrance, was a man she noticed the moment she walked in. Not because he was loud, he was not loud at all. Not because he was large, though he was, broad through the shoulders even at 68, with a kind of build that had once been hard muscle and had settled now into something dense and permanent. He sat with a Marine Corps cap at a precise angle on his close-cropped gray hair. It was the kind of angle that could not be faked. Recruits spent years trying. The angle lived in the body after enough time, or it did not live there at all. His name was Carl Briggs, Sergeant Major, United States Marine Corps, retired. 3 tours, Desert Storm, Somalia, Kosovo. 31 years in uniform, followed by 7 years of civilian life that had not removed 1 degree of the bearing that 3 decades had installed. He was reading a folded newspaper. He was also aware of everything in the room. Both things were true simultaneously. That was also something that lived in the body. Maya approached the reception counter. The woman behind it, nameplate, Brenda, had the efficient tiredness of someone who processed 40 claims a week and had learned long ago not to let the individual weight of each one accumulate. She looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" Maya slid her appointment letter across the counter, followed by her military identification card. "I have a 10:30 appointment for a disability evaluation. I'm the veteran." Brenda picked up the ID card. Her eyes moved from the photograph to Maya's face, then back to the card. The frown that followed was not hostile. It was the frown of someone who had encountered information that did not match the categories they had been given. "Naval Special Warfare Command," Brenda said, reading from the card. "That doesn't seem right." "There's no mistake, ma'am. Let me get my supervisor." Howard Taft came out from the back office, wearing a VA polo and the careful expression of a man who had learned to navigate difficult conversations by keeping his face neutral and his voice measured. Early 40s, organized, genuinely trying to do right by a process that had not been designed with situations like this in mind. He looked at Maya's ID. He looked at Maya. "Ma'am, I think there may be some confusion here. The Navy SEALs are an all-male unit. Women serve in important support roles throughout the Navy, absolutely, but not in direct combat positions with Special Operations Forces." "Sir," Maya kept her voice level, "female corpsmen have been attached to SEAL teams since 2010. We're not SEALs ourselves. We're their medical personnel. I completed the same training pipeline as male corpsmen assigned to Special Warfare Operations. I deployed twice to Helmand Province, Afghanistan, with SEAL Team 3. She opened the folder and began laying documents across the counter, each one placed precisely. DD 214, Combat Action Ribbon Citation, Navy Achievement Medal paperwork. Howard picked up the Combat Action Ribbon documentation, read it, set it down. "These could belong to anyone," he said, "and even if they're yours, it doesn't verify your actual role on these missions. You could have been at the same forward operating base in an administrative capacity." The waiting room had gone quiet. Background noise falls away when something more important enters a room. The low, ambient sound of men passing time, the rustle of magazines, the murmur of a conversation in the back row, the occasional cough, had faded without anyone deciding to stop. Heads had turned. The man with the Desert Storm cap had set down his newspaper. Carl Briggs had set down his newspaper. He stood up. He walked to the counter with the measured pace of a man who had never needed to hurry to make his presence felt. He stopped 2 feet from Maya, close enough to be part of the conversation, not close enough to be threatening. He looked at Howard Taft. Then he looked at Maya. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of 31 years of telling men what to do in places where the wrong order got people killed. "Miss, I'm not trying to be difficult. I did 3 tours overseas. Desert Storm, Somalia, Kosovo. In all that time, running operations alongside some of the finest units this country has ever put in the field, I never once saw a woman running direct action medical on a SEAL mission." He paused. "I'm not saying you didn't serve. I'm saying this particular story doesn't add up. And in my experience, when a story doesn't add up, there's usually a reason." He was not angry. That was almost harder to absorb than anger would have been. He was careful. He was protecting something he believed in. And Maya, looking at the Desert Storm cap and the field jacket with its campaign patches, and the hands that had held weapons in places most people in this country could not find on a map. Maya had thought, when she first walked in and noticed him in the front row, that if anyone in this room would understand her, it would be this man. That understanding had not arrived. More heads had turned. A veteran in his 70s near the window. 2 men by the magazine rack who had stopped pretending to read. A young woman in an Air Force sweatshirt who had been looking at her phone and was no longer looking at her phone. Maya could feel the weight of all of it settling across her shoulders. She had felt something like it before, in a different context, in a different country. The sensation of being in a position where the variables were not in your favor, and the smart move was to stay absolutely still and not give anyone additional ammunition. She had survived those moments. She would survive this one. She was about to speak when she heard it. A voice from the corner of the room near the window, where November light came through the blinds in flat bars of pale gold. The voice was low, roughened by time and too many years in hard weather. But it carried. The way certain voices carry regardless of volume, not because they are loud, but because everything in the room instinctively makes space for them. Let her speak. The man in the wheelchair had not moved. He was exactly where he had been when Maya first walked in, against the far wall, a portable oxygen tank beside his chair, a navy jacket folded across his lap. She had noticed him immediately when she entered. After 2 deployments and 100 situations where knowing who was in the room before something happened was the margin between going home and not, the habit of cataloging a space was permanent. It was not something she chose to do. It happened before she thought about it. The man was 72 years old. He was thin in the specific way that people become thin when something is consuming them from the inside. His face was gaunt, the skin drawn close over the architecture of his cheekbones and jaw. But his eyes, sharp and pale and completely present, were the eyes of a man who had not surrendered 1 degree of awareness to whatever the rest of him was going through. His name was Ray Harmon, Master Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy, retired. 40 years of service. He had spent the last 8 months looking for the woman standing at that counter. Carl Briggs turned toward the corner. Something shifted in the sergeant major's posture. Not deference exactly, but the involuntary adjustment men make when they recognize a rank earned in ways they respect. Ray Harmon wheeled himself forward. The tires of his chair were nearly silent on the worn linoleum. He moved through the room with the unhurried certainty of a man who had stopped performing authority decades ago because he simply had it. He stopped in front of the reception counter. He looked at Maya for a long moment, not with doubt, not with the examining skepticism that Howard Taft had brought or the defensive challenge Carl Briggs had offered. He looked at her with the focused attention of a man accessing something he had been carrying in his memory for a very long time. "What team?" he said. "SEAL Team 3, Master Chief. Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class. 2 deployments, Helmand Province. October 2011 through April 2012. September 2012 through March 2013. Ray Harmon's eyes narrowed slightly, not with doubt, with the expression of a man watching details confirm what he already knew. March 2013. His voice was quiet enough that people in the back of the room leaned forward. Village approach, east of Sangin. 3 critical casualties. The room went completely still. Maya felt her heartbeat in her ears. "You know about that mission." "I know more than that, Doc Calloway." The use of her name which she had not given him, landed in the room like something dropped into still water. "I've been looking for you for 8 months. Howard Taft set down his notepad. Carl Briggs had gone very still, his arms no longer crossed. His posture changed in a way that was subtle but complete. The posture of a man beginning to understand he had been wrong about something and was honest enough not to run from that. Ray Harmon looked at Maya for another moment. Then, "You have proof that can't be faked, bought, or copied. I think it's time these people see it." Maya knew what he meant. Her hand moved to her shoulder without permission. Through the gray sweater she could feel nothing, just fabric, just the pressure of her own fingers. But underneath she could feel what was always there. Raised ink, old scar tissue, a map of something that had happened to her body in a country far from this waiting room, in circumstances these men could imagine but had not shared. The tattoo that covered most of her upper back had been created at Forward Operating Base Leatherneck 1 week after the mission. Her team had insisted on doing it themselves. Chief Walt Drummond had said it had to come from the team, not from a civilian artist in a San Diego shop, not from anyone who had not been there. It had to carry the work in it. It did. That would require removing my sweater, Master Chief, in a private setting. The young woman in the Air Force sweatshirt stood up, short dark hair, eyes that had seen something. I'll go as a female witness. My name is Dana Merritt. I serve with the 332nd in Iraq. If you're showing something that requires privacy, you should have another woman present. Howard Taft looked at Carl Briggs. The sergeant major gave a single, slow nod. Conference room down the hall, Howard said. Second door on the left. They moved through the corridor in a procession that had not been planned and could not have been. Ray Harmon led, his wheelchair rolling ahead with surprising quiet. Maya walked beside him. Behind them came Howard Taft, Carl Briggs, Dana Merritt. Their footsteps mixed on the institutional linoleum and echoed off walls that had absorbed 30 years of claims and counterclaims and the long bureaucratic labor of trying to honor people the country had sent into harm's way. Conference room B was small. A rectangular table, 6 chairs, a whiteboard with the ghost of someone's notes still faintly visible. Fluorescent light overhead, the same frequency as the waiting room. Maya stood at the head of the table. She looked at each person in the room. Howard Taft, holding his notepad, but no longer writing. Carl Briggs near the door, arms at his sides now. Dana Merritt positioned near Maya with a quiet readiness. Ray Harmon at the far end of the table, oxygen tank hissing softly, eyes fixed on Maya with an intensity that asked nothing and demanded nothing, only waited. What you're about to see was created at FOB Leatherneck 1 week after the mission Master Chief Harmon referenced. My team did it themselves. They said it had to come from them. She reached for the hem of her gray sweater, lifted it up and over her head, turned around. The silence that followed was of a specific quality, not the silence of politeness, not the silence of people waiting for something to be explained. The silence of people absorbing something that spoke entirely for itself and required nothing added to it. The tattoo covered most of her upper back, from her shoulder blades down to just above her waistline. The line work was not the polished precision of an expensive American parlor. It had the organic roughness of work done with improvised equipment under difficult conditions, by men trained in entirely other things. That roughness did not diminish it. Polished would have been wrong. This was right because it was honest. The centerpiece was a medical cross in stark black ink. Around it, 3 sets of dog tags rendered in precise detail, their surfaces engraved with names and service numbers in military font. Hatch, Voss, Garfield. Along her right shoulder blade, a string of coordinates. 32 degrees, 14 minutes, 43 seconds north. 64 degrees, 36 minutes, 17 seconds east. A grid reference inscribed with the same precision a navigator would use, because whoever had done it had been a navigator, among other things. Below the cross, a pair of combat boots, laces tied together in the memorial style, and woven through the entire design in 7 distinct styles of handwriting were signatures. Not printed names, actual signatures, personal, individual, unrepeatable the way a person's handwriting is unrepeatable. Each one traced over in permanent ink by the same needle that had drawn everything else. Each one a record that could not be separated from the skin that carried it. But it was the scars that changed the room. Pale, raised, slightly irregular, shrapnel scarring along the lower left quadrant of her back. A longer line that spoke of surgical work, precise and deliberate, running parallel to the spine. The tattoo had been designed around them, not to hide them, not to cover them, to incorporate them. The raised tissue was part of the composition, the way a river is in a landscape, Not an obstacle, but an element the design had been built to include. This was not decoration. This was documentation. A record written on living skin by men who had been there, of what had happened in a specific place on a specific date. It could not be purchased. It could not be transferred. It could not be claimed by anyone who had not earned the right to carry it. Ray Harmon's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "Blood wings," he said. The words came out rough, weighted with something old. They gave her blood wings. Carl Briggs had moved without realizing he was moving. He was standing closer now, close enough to read the coordinates. His face had changed. The careful skepticism was gone, not defeated but replaced by something more complex and more honest. He was a man who had asked a hard question and received an answer that required him to revise everything he thought he understood about the situation. He read the GPS numbers quietly to himself. Then he stopped. He stood very still. When he spoke, his voice was different from any voice he had used since Maya walked into this building. "I was stationed at Camp Leatherneck in March of 2013. The words came slowly, the memory surfacing through years. "I was on the landing pad when a medevac bird came in with 3 critical SEAL casualties. The corpsman who came off that bird was still working. Both hands on one man, one applying pressure, the other maintaining an IV line she'd started in the field. Hands shaking from sustained compression. She would not let go." He looked at Maya's back, at the name Voss on the dog tags around the cross. "I helped lift the casualties off that helicopter. I was 3 feet away from her." A pause. "That was you." Maya pulled her sweater back on. She turned around. Carl Briggs was looking at her with an expression she recognized. Not guilt exactly, not shame. The expression of a man who had been protecting something important and had just discovered that what he was protecting and what he had been challenging were the same thing. Howard Taft's notepad was on the table. He was not writing. Dana Merritt had one hand over her mouth. Ray Harmon looked at Maya with the focused stillness of a man who had come a long distance for this moment and was watching it arrive exactly as he had needed it to. "There's a reason I've been looking for you for 8 months, Doc Calloway," he said. "What happened to your Silver Star recommendation? That wasn't an accident, and it wasn't just you." The room held that sentence. Maya looked at him, at the oxygen tank, at the navy jacket folded across his lap, the ribbons and patches of 40 years of service. "How many others?" she said. Ray Harmon did not answer immediately. He looked at her for a moment longer with those sharp, pale eyes. "That conversation is going to take more than this room," he said. "But I've got every document you need, and I've got time." Something crossed his face, not sadness, but the particular acknowledgement of a man who knows exactly how much time he has and has already decided what to do with it. "Not as much as I'd like, but enough." In the waiting room, through the closed conference room door, the other veterans were still in their plastic chairs. Some had gone back to their newspapers. Some had not. Carl Briggs walked back into the hallway first. He stopped just outside the door and stood for a moment with one hand against the wall, not looking at anything in particular, processing something that was going to take more than a moment to fully process. Then he straightened, squared his shoulders, walked back toward the waiting room with the deliberate pace of a man who had something to say and intended to say it. What came next? The conversation Ray Harmon had spent 8 months preparing for. The documents he had assembled. The 47 names written in careful handwriting in a worn notebook. All of it was still ahead. But something had already changed in that small conference room. A young woman in a gray sweater had come to a government office to file a disability claim for injuries she had kept hidden for years, so she would not interrupt a mission. She had been asked to prove herself. She had turned around and shown them a map drawn in ink and scar tissue, signed by 7 men who had been there. And in a waiting room full of people who had spent their lives demanding proof of things worth believing in, the proof had arrived in the only form that could not be questioned. Written on her body, permanent, undeniable, earned. The story went viral on a Tuesday. By Thursday morning, Maya had 217 unread emails, a phone she had silenced after the fourth reporter called before 9, and a sink full of dishes she had not washed because she had not been able to make herself stand in the kitchen long enough to wash them. She sat on the floor of her apartment instead, back against the wall below the window, laptop open on her knees, reading subject lines without opening most of them. The cursor blinked in her inbox the way the second hand had blinked in the VA waiting room. Mechanical, indifferent, measuring time that did not care what it was measuring. A military blogger named Patrick Odom had been in that waiting room. He had written a piece titled, "Female SEAL Medic Denied Silver Star, a Pattern of Bias Exposed," and posted it the same evening. By the next morning, 40,000 shares. By the end of the week, 800,000. Military Times picked it up. Then two national cable networks. Then others. The story had moved beyond anything Maya had imagined when she agreed, standing in that small conference room, to turn around and show them. The emails fell into categories she had not anticipated. There were the messages of support. Female veterans writing in from bases she had never served on, from states she had never lived in, with stories she recognized. Army medics, Air Force security forces, Marine intelligence officers, women who had held things together and kept things running in silence, who were now finding each other through one forwarded article at a time, in the way people find each other when they discover they are not as alone as they had assumed. Then there were the others. Stolen valor, attention seeker, political agenda, women don't belong in combat. The accounts were mostly faceless, screen names assembled from numbers and aggression. But the words were real words, and they landed in the body the way real words do, regardless of who sent them or from where. Maya read them. She did not know why she kept reading them. Some part of her, the part that had trained to understand the terrain before moving through it, kept pulling her back to the screen. Her lower back was on fire. The 3 herniated discs from the blast injury she had never reported had been manageable when she was moving, when she was in physical therapy, when she had routine. 3 weeks of disrupted sleep and sitting wrong on floors and at desks had undone 6 months of careful management. The pain woke her at 3 in the morning and would not let her go back to sleep. She lay in the dark and told herself it was just compression and the nerves would settle, and it was not permanent. She had been telling herself things like that for 8 years. It was 2 in the morning on the 22nd day after the VA office when she picked up her phone and called Ray Harmon. She had not planned to call him. She had been staring at the ceiling of her bedroom with the phone on her chest, listening to the quiet of a coastal neighborhood at that hour, the distant suggestion of the ocean 2 miles away, a car passing every few minutes, the soft mechanical hum of the refrigerator. Then she was dialing. He answered on the second ring, not groggy, immediately present. She said, "I think I made a mistake going public. I think I should let it go quiet." There was silence on the other end. Not the silence of a man gathering himself. The immediate, alert silence of a man who had been lying in his own dark, thinking his own version of similar thoughts. Then Ray Harmon said, "You called me at 2 in the morning, Doc Calloway." "I know. That means you haven't quit yet. Don't start now." She did not say anything. "The noise you're hearing is not the story," he said. "The noise is what happens around the story. The story is what happened to you, what happened to the others, and what needs to happen next. Those are different things. Don't let the noise make you forget the difference." The pain in her back pulsed with her heartbeat, steady and persistent. "Get some sleep," Ray said. "I'm setting up the call for tomorrow night." She put the phone down. She did not sleep well, but she did not quit. The video conference link appeared in her inbox the following evening at 7:58. She clicked it at exactly 8 o'clock. 4 faces appeared on her screen. She had not spoken to any of them in more than a year. She had done that deliberately. The withdrawal from military connections had been a conscious decision. made sometime in the third month after she left service, when she understood that maintaining those relationships was keeping her suspended between two versions of her life. She could not build the civilian version while still reaching back toward the other one. It had felt like the right choice at the time. Looking at those four faces now, she understood what it had cost her. Tyler Hatch appeared first, 32, lean in the way that men who stay physically active but no longer train like operators become lean, functional rather than performative. His hair was longer than any regulation she had known him under. He wore a civilian paramedic uniform. The easy quality she remembered in him was still there, but the eyes above it were older. Doc Calloway, it's been too long. Marcus Voss came on next. 34, broader through the shoulders than she remembered, with a beard that would have failed every inspection she had ever witnessed. He had the careful stillness of a man who did private security work and had learned to be present in rooms without advertising it. When he looked at her through the screen, something in his face opened in a way it had not opened for anyone else that day. I heard you met Sandra. Owen Garfield appeared third, 33, with wire-rimmed glasses he had not been wearing during their deployments. He had always been the quietest of the three critical casualties from the day that had become the axis around which everything else turned. The traumatic brain injury had ended his career, but he had rebuilt around it. Physical therapist now, specializing in TBI rehabilitation, as though he had decided to become the thing that had helped him most. Hey Doc, good to see your face. Chief Walt Drummond filled the last frame. 48 years old, retired from Naval Special Warfare 2 years prior. He had put on weight that sat on him comfortably, the discipline still underneath it. His bearing was absolute. He looked at Maya the way he had always looked at her during deployment briefings, with the focused assessment of a man who needed to know exactly what he was working with before committing to anything. The team's been talking. We need to discuss what's happening and what we're going to do about it. They talked about the coverage, the emails, the reporters, the way the story had grown beyond the conference room where it began. Tyler said 3 journalists had contacted him directly. Marcus said the same. Owen had not responded to any of them and was waiting for direction. Then Walt leaned forward and said, Doc, there's something else, something that needs to be part of this. He reached off screen and came back with a folder worn from repeated handling. The Navy just declassified additional operational records from our second deployment. I've been keeping personal combat logs since 2004, more detailed than official after-action reports. What's in them about you goes beyond March 15th. Maya was quiet. She knew what was in those logs. She had been there. February 2013, Walt said. Convoy ambush on the route north of Marja. IED strike. 4 casualties. I remember. You treated all 4 of them, on site, under fire, before the QRF arrived. He held her gaze. What's not in any official record is that you were already injured when you did it. Blast from the same IED. Our flight surgeon noted it afterward and flagged it to me privately. 3 herniated discs and a grade 2 concussion. The kitchen was very quiet. You refused evacuation. You told the flight surgeon you were functional, treated all 4 casualties, stabilized them, held the position until the quick reaction force arrived. And then you wrote in your own incident report that you had sustained, quote, minor soft tissue bruising. Tyler and Marcus and Owen were looking at her through their respective screens. None of them spoke. You didn't just save lives that day, Walt said. You hid your own wounds so the mission wouldn't be compromised. You kept that injury unreported for the rest of the deployment, kept it unreported after you left service. And now it's the injury that's been waking you up at 3 in the morning for 8 years. Maya looked at the table in front of her, then back at the screen. If I had reported it, the mission would have been flagged. I would have been pulled. I know. The team needed a corpsman. I know that too. Walt did not look away. Doc, that's exactly the point. You absorbed damage so the mission could continue. That's not in any official record. It needs to be part of this story. After a moment, Marcus Voss said, "There's something I've never told you." His voice had changed. The careful stillness had shifted into something more open and more difficult. When I was going out on the bird, I was fading. I could feel it happening, the edges going soft, the sound changing. I kept thinking about Sandra, about my family, about all the things I hadn't done yet. He paused. And then I heard your voice, completely calm, telling me what you were doing and why it was going to work. I held on to that voice for 38 minutes, the way you hold on to a rope in fast water. He stopped for a moment. I got to walk Sandra down the aisle at her wedding because of that voice. I have a whole life because of you. And then someone in an office decided that action wasn't worth full recognition. That's not bureaucratic failure. That's a deliberate choice to diminish something extraordinary. Owen said quietly, "I don't have clear memory of that day. The TBI took most of it, but I know what the surgical team at Leatherneck told me afterward. They said whoever ran my field neurological assessments during transport understood exactly what they were managing. Every protocol correct, every indicator logged. They said it was that field care that prevented the damage from being permanent." He adjusted his glasses. "I became a TBI therapist because of what happened to me. Every patient I work with exists downstream of what you did in that helicopter. That is your work, extending forward through time in ways you will never fully see." The call continued. Walt walked through the other declassified records. Tyler described the February ambush from his position. Documentation accumulated the way it does when people who were present begin to speak honestly about what they saw. Then the others logged off. Walt, Tyler, Owen, and only Marcus remained for a moment. He looked at her through the screen. "Sandra asked me to tell you something. She said, 'Thank you for giving him back to us.' She said she means all of us, our parents, our cousins, all of them. 10 years she spent not knowing. Now she knows. She said it changes everything. Knowing." He logged off. Only Ray Harmon's face was on the screen. He had been quiet through most of the call, present in the background, allowing the team to do what teams do when they are finally allowed to speak plainly. Now he looked at Maya directly. "There's something I need to tell you. The real reason I've been looking for you for 8 months. Maya waited. "I was on the review board that evaluated your Silver Star recommendation in April of 2013. The kitchen was absolutely still. Chief Drummond's recommendation was the most thoroughly documented case I read in 40 years of service. 8 witness statements from SEAL operators. Surgical team attestations from Leatherneck. After action reports corroborated by 3 independent sources. It was not ambiguous. It was not a close call." He stopped. The oxygen hissed softly. Rear Admiral Glenn Pruitt was the senior officer on that board. He argued that awarding a Silver Star to a female corpsman in 2013 would create political complications. That it would set a precedent the Navy was not ready to defend publicly. That the optics, those were his exact words, the optics were not favorable. Ray's jaw tightened. I disagreed. I sat in that room and I disagreed. And when the vote came, I voted with the majority. I told myself the case against wasn't strong enough to overcome. I told myself there were larger institutional considerations. I told myself a lot of things." He paused. "I was lying to myself. I was afraid of Pruitt. He was the senior officer in that room, and I did not have the courage to be the one vote that stood against him. So I didn't." Maya had not moved. "I have stage 4 lung cancer. The doctors give me 6 months, probably less. And I have spent 8 of those months tracking you down through the VA system because before I go, I intend to spend every day I have left fixing what I was too afraid to fix in 2013. His voice did not waver. "Not just for you, because you are not the only one." He reached off screen, came back with a folder thicker than Walt's had been. He opened it and looked at the first page the way a man looks at something he has examined many times and still cannot fully make peace with. Between 2011 and 2014, Rear Admiral Pruitt sat on review boards evaluating combat award recommendations for female service members across multiple branches. I have documented 47 cases: Army medics, Air Force security personnel, Navy corpsmen attached to Marine reconnaissance units. He looked up. In every case, the original recommendation was downgraded. In every case, the language in Pruitt's board notes referenced institutional considerations, policy timing, or precedent concerns. In no case was the justification about the action itself. He closed the folder. 47 women, 47 acts of courage measured and found, by one man's calculation, to be inconvenient. Maya looked at the closed folder and raised hands. She thought about the inbox with 217 emails, the floor of her apartment at 2 in the morning, the back pain that had been following her for 8 years like a shadow she had earned by refusing to acknowledge it. She thought about Sandra Voss, who had called 3 days after the VA office with a voice that was still absorbing something it had needed to absorb for a decade. Sandra had been an Army nurse in the Gulf War. She had been in that waiting room the day Maya turned around, sitting in the back where no one had noticed her. And she had seen through the half-open conference room door the dog tags on the tattoo and the name Voss. And she had understood in a single second what her brother had never been able to tell her. Sandra had said, "He just told us he got dinged up. Every time we pushed, he'd change the subject or make a joke. For 10 years, I thought he was being modest. I didn't know. None of us knew." Maya had held the phone through that call and said very little because there was very little to say. Marcus Voss had been 26 years old on March 15th, and he would have been dead before 27 without the 38 minutes Maya had given him. And his family had been living alongside that fact for a decade without knowing what they were living alongside. The things people carry without knowing what they are carrying. Now she looked at Ray Harmon's face on the screen, the gaunt face, the sharp eyes, the man who had helped put her in this position 8 years ago and had spent 8 months finding his way back to say so. And she felt the full weight of 47 names she had not yet read. She stood up, walked to the window, stood looking at the city lights of San Diego, the distant suggestion of the ocean, the ordinary dark of an ordinary November night in a country where 47 women had done extraordinary things and been quietly told to accept less. Then she turned back to the screen. "Set up the meeting with Naval Personnel Command. Contact Patricia Dawson's office. Tell them we're ready." Ray nodded. "But I need you to understand something first. This is not about my medal anymore. It may have started there. It doesn't end there." She looked at him steadily. "We go for all 47, or we don't go at all. Every case reviewed, every record corrected, every woman contacted. If the Navy wants to address this, they address it completely. Not one ceremony for one corpsman as a press opportunity. All of it." Ray Harmon looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face that was not quite sadness and not quite pride, but the complex mixture of the two that arrives when a person watches someone become the thing they needed to become. "That's the right answer, Doc," he said. "How long do we have to build the case?" "The documentation is already built. I've had 8 months." He looked down at the folder. "I wasn't looking for you just to apologize. I was looking for you because I needed you to be part of what comes next. The Navy will listen to you. They won't just listen to a dying Master Chief with declassified records and a guilty conscience. They'll listen to the team. Walt, Tyler, Marcus, Owen, they need to be part of this. They already know. Walt told them before the call tonight, all 4 are ready." Maya stood at the window for another moment. The coffee on the table had gone cold. Her back ached the same as it had ached for 8 years and would ache tomorrow. But something had shifted underneath the pain. "Tell me their names," she said. "The 47. Ray reached into the folder. He began to read. Army Sergeant First Class. FOB Salerno, 2012. Recommended for Bronze Star with Valor. Downgraded to Army Commendation Medal. Air Force Staff Sergeant, Security Forces, Bagram, 2011. Recommended for Bronze Star, downgraded to Air Force Commendation Medal. Navy Hospital Corpsman, attached to 1st Marine Reconnaissance Battalion. Recommended for Navy Cross, downgraded to Navy Achievement Medal. He read for a long time. Maya stood at the window and listened to every name. She did not write them down. She did not need to. They were going in the same place her own story had always lived. Not on paper, not in a folder, but somewhere deeper, in the body, in the way the body keeps what the mind has not yet found words for. When he finished, the apartment was quiet around her. "I'll be there," she said. "Every hearing, every review, every press conference, if it comes to that." She looked at her reflection in the dark glass. Brown hair, gray sweater, the same exterior that had walked into the VA office 3 weeks ago. "But I want to be clear about something. I'm not doing this to become a symbol. I'm doing this because 47 women did their jobs, and the record is wrong. I'm doing this because the record needs to be right. That's the mission. That's the only mission." Ray Harmon closed the folder. "Hoo-yah," he said, quietly, the way the word is said when it means something real. Outside, a car passed on the street below. The ocean was out there in the distance, patient and enormous and entirely indifferent to the small, significant things happening along its edge. Maya Calloway had walked into a government office 3 weeks ago to file paperwork for an injury she had been absorbing for 8 years. She had ended up in a conference room, turning her back to strangers and letting them read the record written on her skin. Now she was standing at a window with 47 names inside her and a promise she had not made in words, but had made in the only way that counted. The mission had changed. Missions always did. The question was never whether you were ready for what was coming. The question was whether, when it came, you held your ground. Maya Calloway had been holding her ground since she was 20 years old, in a country far from this window. She had no intention of stopping now. Maya had been awake since 4. She had made coffee in the dark and sat at the kitchen table with her 3 pages of prepared remarks in front of her, reading them until the words stopped meaning anything. That was how she knew she was ready. When the words had been absorbed past the point of language and become something closer to reflex. The speech had been written, revised, cut down, and rebuilt twice over the past 3 weeks. The version she had finally printed was the version she thought she could deliver, without her voice doing something she did not want it to do, in front of 600 people and an unknown number of cameras. By the time she arrived at NAS North Island and was directed to the holding area behind the main hangar, the morning had warmed into the kind of February day in San Diego that the rest of the country in February did not believe existed. The light was clean and flat. The air off the bay had that particular coastal quality that was neither warm nor cold, but simply present, like a conversation happening in the background of something else. The hangar was large enough to hold the occasion without crowding it. 600 chairs in precise military rows on the main floor, facing a raised platform at the far end where a podium stood with the Navy SEAL mounted prominently on its face. Camera positions established at 3 angles. A reserved section in the first 2 rows held seats for Maya's team, their families, selected personnel from Naval Personnel Command, and representatives from the Secretary's office. Maya stood backstage and watched the hangar fill through a gap in the curtain. She was in her dress blues. The uniform fit correctly, but with the slight foreignness of clothes belonging to a version of yourself you have not inhabited recently. The silver star she had not yet earned the right to wear was in a presentation case in her left hand. She had been holding it for 40 minutes. Her hand had stopped registering the weight of it. Her lower back ached. It always ached. Today it was background noise. Ray Harmon wheeled up beside her. He looked worse than at the VA office 3 months before. The cancer had been moving fast, the way cancers do when they have decided. His dress uniform hung from his frame with the looseness of a garment sized for a man who no longer existed at those dimensions. 20 pounds gone since November, at least. The oxygen tank beside his chair was larger than the one she had first seen him with, and the tubing running to his nose slightly thicker. But his eyes were unchanged. That at least the cancer had not touched. He looked at her for a moment. Then he reached into the bag on his wheelchair and produced a notebook. Worn from long handling, the cover soft, the corners rounded. He held it out to her. She took it. 47 names, he said. Contact information for each one. Unit records, award documentation, the specific board notes from Pruitt's reviews. The Navy has begun the formal review process because of what we started. But reviews take time, and bureaucracies move at the speed of bureaucracies. And these women have been waiting long enough. They need someone who knows the terrain, someone who has stood where they have stood. He paused. That's you, Doc. After today, that's you. Maya looked at the notebook in her hands. 47 names she had memorized on a November night standing at a window. Now they were here in ink, tangible and specific and waiting. Go tell the truth, Ray said. That's all this is. Go stand up there and tell the truth, and let the truth do what truth does. He settled back in his chair. His part of the preparation was complete. He had spent 8 months assembling the case, finding the woman who could carry it, and delivering both to this morning. What happened on that platform belonged to her now. Maya tucked the notebook inside her uniform jacket, against her chest. She looked through the curtain gap one more time. Her team was in the first row. Walt Drummond sitting at attention the way he always sat. Retirement not having removed 1 degree of the bearing that 30 years had installed. Tyler Hatch beside him, visibly uncomfortable in dress blues he had clearly not worn in years. His hair still slightly long for regulation, but his posture carrying what posture carries regardless of hair length. Marcus Voss, broad-shouldered and still, with Sandra beside him. Sandra, who had spent 10 years not knowing, who now sat with the composure of a woman finally given the information she had always deserved. Owen Garfield with his wire-rimmed glasses and the deliberate quality he brought to every room. Behind the team, Carl Briggs sat in his Marine field jacket. He had not worn his dress uniform. Maya understood why. The field jacket said something the dress uniform did not. It said, I am here as a witness. I am here because I owe a debt, and I am paying it. Dana Merritt was several rows back in her Air Force dress uniform, sitting with a group of women Maya recognized from the emails. Female veterans from different states, different branches, different wars, drawn here by a story that was also their story. And 3 rows back from the front, sitting alone in the aisle seat, was Rear Admiral Glenn Pruitt, 70 years old, ramrod straight, dress uniform without a wrinkle. His face was the face of a man who had made a decision and was living fully inside it. He was not looking toward the platform. He was looking at his hands. Maya had known he was coming. Ray had told her 2 days before. She had spent those 2 days deciding what to do with that knowledge, whether to have him asked to leave, whether to ignore his presence entirely, whether to address it directly from the platform. She had worked through every position and rejected them all. What she had arrived at was simpler and harder than any of them. She had decided to let whatever was going to happen, happen. The Secretary of the Navy opened the ceremony with prepared remarks that carried genuine weight because the occasion underneath them was real. He spoke about institutional accountability, about the Navy's commitment to reviewing all 47 cases, about he had recommended people for decorations and watched some of those recommendations move through the system and some not move, and had never gone back to find out what happened to the ones that stalled, because going back was not something the operational tempo of that life permitted. He had gone back for this one. Doc Calloway was the best corpsman I served with in 22 years, he said. His voice carried through the hangar with complete certainty. Not because she was female, not to make any particular statement, because when rounds were flying and men were dying, she was the person I knew, with absolute certainty, without any reservation, would bring them home alive. Her medical expertise was exceptional. Her courage under fire was extraordinary. Her judgment in conditions designed to destroy judgment was flawless. He looked directly at Maya. That silver star is 8 years late. It is not 1 minute less earned. Tyler Hatch spoke next with the directness of a man who had decided to say what he had to say without ornament or delay. I was bleeding out from femoral artery damage, going into shock, vision narrowing, and I heard Doc's voice in my ear, calm, completely calm, telling me what she was doing and why it was going to work. She started an IV one-handed while maintaining arterial pressure on another casualty with her other hand and her knee, both things simultaneously in a helicopter taking fire. He stopped for a moment. That's not something you train into a person. It's something a person either has when everything goes wrong at once or doesn't have. She had it. Marcus Voss approached the podium and stood there for a moment before speaking. His voice, when it came, was steady and layered with something that had been waiting a long time to be said in a room like this. My sister Sandra is in this room today. For 10 years, she knew I had been wounded in Afghanistan. She did not know how close she came to losing me. I didn't tell her because I didn't know how to tell her something that large without telling her everything that came with it. He stopped, steadied himself. Maya Calloway held my subclavian artery closed for 38 minutes while we were taking fire from multiple positions. I was 26 years old, and I was going to die. And I didn't die because she held on. He looked up at the room. The Navy looked at that action and decided it didn't quite merit full recognition because of her gender. That's not a bureaucratic error. That's a moral failure. The people in this room deserve to hear it called exactly what it is. Owen Garfield's testimony was the quietest and in some ways the most precise. I don't have clear memory of March 15th because of the traumatic brain injury I sustained that day. But I know what the surgical team told me afterward. They said whoever ran my field neurological assessments during transport understood exactly what they were managing. Every indicator correct. Every protocol observed. They said that field care prevented the damage from being permanent. He adjusted his glasses. I became a TBI therapist because of what happened to me. Every patient I have worked with since exists, in some measure, downstream of what was done for me in that helicopter. That is Doc Calloway's work, extending forward through time in ways she will never fully see. Then it was Maya's turn. She walked to the podium with legs that held. She looked out at 600 faces, found her team in the front row, found Ray at the edge of the platform, the oxygen hissing softly, his pale eyes steady on her, found Glenn Pruitt 3 rows back, still looking at his hands. She opened the folder with her prepared speech, looked at the first line, then she closed the folder. 3 months ago, she said, I sat in a VA waiting room in San Diego and was told that my service record didn't seem right, that the assignment I listed on my paperwork didn't seem possible for someone who looked like me. She let that settle. I was asked to prove myself, and I did. I turned around and showed a room full of strangers a tattoo created by my team in Afghanistan. 7 signatures, GPS coordinates from March 15th, 2013, and the names of 3 men whose lives had passed through my hands on that date. She looked at the room. I am not here today because I proved myself in that conference room. I'm here because a 72-year-old Master Chief with stage 4 lung cancer spent 8 months tracking me down to tell me the truth about what happened to my Silver Star recommendation in 2013. He didn't have to do that. He is dying, and he chose to spend his remaining time doing that. I want this room to understand what that means. She paused. But this ceremony is not about me or my medal. There are 47 women whose names I have memorized, whose cases are now under review, whose courage was evaluated by a system that found it inconvenient. They are the reason this room matters today. They are the reason this ceremony needs to be the beginning of something and not the conclusion of it. She looked at the first row, at Walt, Tyler, Marcus, Owen. These men served with me. They saw what I did. They never doubted it. They are here today not because anyone asked them to be here, but because that is what you do for the people you went to war with. You show up. You tell the truth. You hold the ground. Then something moved in her peripheral vision. Glenn Pruitt was standing. He rose from his aisle seat and moved into the open space of the central aisle. He walked forward with the measured pace of a man who had made a difficult decision and was now executing it with the precision that a lifetime in uniform had installed in him. He stopped at the base of the platform steps. 600 people went completely still. He looked up at Maya. She looked down at him. The distance between them was 8 years and 47 names, and one vote cast in a review board meeting in April of 2013. "My name is Rear Admiral Glenn Pruitt," he said, his voice carried without amplification. The voice of a man who had spent decades projecting authority across flight decks and briefing rooms. United States Navy, retired. I was the senior officer on the review board that evaluated Corman Calloway's Silver Star recommendation in April of 2013. He turned to face the full room. "I argued in that board meeting that awarding this decoration to a female corpsman at that particular moment would create political complications the Navy was not prepared to manage. I used the word optics. I am not proud of that word." He stopped for a moment. "I voted to downgrade the recommendation to a Navy Achievement Medal. Not because the action did not merit the Silver Star, it merited the Silver Star and more. I voted to downgrade it because I was more concerned with institutional management than with institutional honor." The hangar held the silence completely. Between 2011 and 2014, I sat on review boards that evaluated combat award recommendations for 47 female service members across 4 branches of the armed forces. In every case, I influenced the board toward a lesser award. In every case, the justification I offered was institutional or political. In no case was the justification about the action itself. He paused. The actions in every case were extraordinary. I knew that at the time. I made my decisions anyway. He turned back to Maya. "I have submitted a formal written statement to the Secretary's office detailing my role in each of the 47 cases. I am prepared to testify before the Senate Armed Services Committee. I am prepared to cooperate fully with any review process the Navy conducts." He held her gaze without flinching. "I cannot give you back 8 years, Corman Calloway. I cannot give the other 46 women back what was taken from them. But I can stand here in front of this room and say without qualification that what was done was wrong, that I did it, and that I am sorry." He came to attention, the posture of a man who had been standing at attention for 50 years and understood exactly what it meant. He raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute. Maya stood at the podium for a moment. She thought about the floor of her apartment at 2 in the morning, and the cold coffee, and the inbox full of names trying to make her something other than what she was. She thought about Portland and Phoenix, and the forms she had not filed, and the things she had absorbed and carried and declined to report because reporting them would have cost too much. She thought about 47 women who had done their jobs in places far from comfortable and come home to a record that did not tell the truth about what they had done. She raised her right hand and returned the salute with the precision of someone for whom that gesture carried everything it was supposed to carry. The room exhaled. Then Walt Drummond stood up, and his voice came out with the command authority of a man who had spent 22 years making sure people moved exactly when he needed them to move. "SEAL Team 3, attention." 8 men rose from the first 2 rows in unison. The synchronized movement of men who had trained together until individual action became collective instinct. They came to rigid attention facing the platform, facing Maya, their bearing absolute. Walt's voice filled the hangar. "Hospital Corpsman Maya Renee Calloway. On behalf of SEAL Team 3, past and present, and every operator whose life you supported in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. You are one of us. You have always been one of us. No board decision, no institutional failure, no administrative document will ever change what was written in that forward operating base and what is written on your back. A pause. Hoo-yah. The word came from 8 throats simultaneously and moved through the hangar the way sound moves through large spaces, expanding, filling, arriving at every wall and returning changed. Sandra Voss, in the second row, had both hands pressed over her mouth. Her shoulders were moving. Marcus put his arm around her and held on. Dana Merritt was standing. The female veterans scattered through the rows were standing. Carl Briggs was standing in his field jacket, his Marine Corps cap at its precise angle, at attention with the weight of a man who had been wrong about something important and had spent the week since doing everything he could to make it right. The Secretary of the Navy stepped forward with the Silver Star in its presentation case. Maya stood at attention on the platform and felt the metal settle against her chest. The weight of it was specific and real, and entirely different from the weight of the presentation case she had been holding all morning. It was lighter than she had expected. Small, in the way that significant things are often smaller than their significance suggests. She had been waiting 8 years for something to weigh exactly this much. Afterward, when the formal portions concluded, and the room had broken into the movement of a ceremony transitioning to its aftermath, Ray Harmon found her in a quieter section of the hangar near the far wall, away from the cameras and the formal conversation. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. "How does it feel?" he said. Maya considered the question honestly. "Like it's been 8 years, she said. "That's the right answer." His eyes moved to where she had tucked the notebook, against her chest inside the uniform jacket. He did not reach for it. He just looked at it for a moment, the way a man looks at something he has carried a long distance and finally set down in the right place. "When I'm gone," he said, "these women need someone who understands the terrain, someone who has stood where they have stood and knows what it costs." He looked at her steadily. "You told me in November that you weren't doing this to become a symbol. I believed you then, and I believe you now. But sometimes the mission finds you, Doc. You don't always get to choose which one." "I know," she said. "I know you know." He settled back slightly. The effort of the morning was visible in him. "I'm proud of what we did. Whatever else I was or wasn't, whatever I did or failed to do in that board meeting 8 years ago, I'm proud of this." She looked at him, at the gaunt face and the eyes the cancer had not touched, and the dress uniform hanging loose on a frame that had given most of itself to something already. At the man who had spent 8 months of whatever time he had left tracking down the woman he had failed and assembling the case that might make it right. "You did make it right," she said. "That's what this was." He did not argue. He nodded once, the way he nodded when something had been said that did not require addition. They stood together in the relative quiet at the hangar's edge, while the ceremony's aftermath continued around them. Carl Briggs was across the room, talking with 2 of the female veterans who had come from out of state. The conversation going on in the way conversations go on when people have found unexpected common ground. Dana Merritt was with a group of women exchanging contact information with the urgency of people who have just discovered a network they did not know existed. Walt and Tyler and Owen were together near the platform, talking in the easy shorthand of men who had been through things that only certain other people fully understand. Marcus Voss was with Sandra. They were standing slightly apart from everyone else, not talking, just standing together in the way that siblings stand when something large has finally been said, and the silence after it is not empty but full. Maya watched all of it. 47 days later, Ray Harmon died at his home in Coronado, in the early hours of a March morning when the city was quiet and the bay was still. His daughter called Maya at 6:15 and said it had been peaceful, that he had been comfortable, that his last words had been spoken in the clarity that sometimes comes near the end of things. He had said, "Mission complete." He had asked his daughter to tell Doc Calloway that she had done good. The funeral was at Arlington National Cemetery on a morning in early April, when the cherry trees along the memorial paths were at the edge of blooming, the buds just beginning to open in the tentative way of things that are ready but not yet committed. The kind of mourning that felt like a threshold. Maya stood with her team as taps played across the hillside. The notes moved through the cold air with a particular quality that taps has in open outdoor spaces. Unaccompanied, unhurried, making no argument and offering no comfort except the comfort of being heard completely. The flag was folded with the precision that had been practiced and maintained and passed down through generations of people for whom that precision was not ceremony, but meaning. Topic triangle by triangle until the whole became the small, dense, carefully made thing that was placed in the hands of Ray Harmon's daughter. She held it against her chest and looked at the sky. After the service, when people had begun moving toward the cars and the day was reasserting itself, Carl Briggs found Maya near the path. He was in his dress uniform. He had not worn it at the ceremony in February. He wore it today. They both understood what that meant without either of them saying so. He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. His name in the return address corner. His handwriting on the front, the penmanship of a man who had learned to write clearly because unclear orders got people killed. "I wrote that 3 weeks ago," he said. "Wasn't sure I was going to give it to you. Decided I was." Maya took the envelope. 14 of the 47 women have legal representation now. I've been calling veteran advocacy organizations every day since February. Some of their cases will be resolved in the next 6 months. Some will take longer. All of them have someone in their corner. He paused. That started because of what happened in that conference room in November. I want you to know that. He came to attention, specific and deliberate and directed at her alone. Then he rendered the salute he had not rendered in November, the one he had owed her since November, clean and precise and held for the full count. Maya returned it. He lowered his hand, nodded once, turned and walked back toward the path. She stood there for a moment after he had gone, looking at the hillside with its rows of white markers extending toward the tree line. 40 years of Aprils had come and gone across this ground. 40 years of mornings like this one, cold and clear and carrying the weight of what the markers represented. She put the envelope in her jacket pocket against the notebook with the 47 names. On the drive back to San Diego, she pulled off at a rest stop on I-5 and sat in the parked car. The way she had sat in the VA parking lot in November. The parallel was not lost on her, but the interior of the car felt different from that November morning. The same person, the same brown hair, the same gray sweater she had put on without thinking because it was warm and unremarkable. But something had moved through her in the months between that parking lot and this one, and had left things in a different arrangement. She opened Carl Briggs's envelope. Inside was a single page, handwritten on ruled paper, the penmanship of a man who had spent 30 years filling out field reports in bad light. Miss Calloway. I spent 31 years learning that being wrong is not the hard part. The hard part is what you do after. I'm still learning. Briggs. Below his name, a phone number. Below that, 7 veteran advocacy organizations listed with a contact name written carefully beside each one. Maya folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. She took out her phone. She opened a new message and addressed it to the 47 names in Ray Harmon's notebook. One by one, the way you do something that you are going to do completely or not at all. She wrote, "My name is Maya Calloway. I received the Silver Star last month that was downgraded 8 years ago because of decisions made by a man who has since stood in public and said that what he did was wrong. Master Chief Ray Harmon gave me your names because your cases are under review and you deserve to know that someone is fighting for them. You are not alone in this. You were never alone in this. We simply did not know about each other yet." She looked at the message, then she sent it. She drove back onto the highway, heading south toward the coast and the city and whatever the next morning would bring. The Pacific was out there beyond the hills, doing what it always did, patient and enormous and entirely indifferent to the small, significant things happening along its edge. In her jacket pocket, against her chest, the notebook with 47 names and Carl Briggs's careful handwriting and the phone number of a man who had been wrong and was spending his remaining time making it right. On her back, underneath the gray sweater, the coordinates in the signatures in the medical cross and the three names that had been written there in a forward operating base in Helmand province by men who had decided, with the permanence of ink pressed into skin, that she was one of them. They had asked for proof. She had shown them truth written in ink in scars. And now there was more work to do. There was always more work to do. She drove south toward the light.